The room was quiet but heavy, not with silence but with pressure. The kind that lives in polished wood panels, red velvet chairs, and the long, cold echo of history. Cameras blinked silently. Phones were ready. The House Oversight Committee hearing was live, and millions were watching. Karoline Leavitt stood still for a moment at the witness podium. Just 26 years old. She didn't look like a threat. Small frame, smooth voice, sharp eyes. Many people in that room had already decided what to think of her. Too young, too loud, and too conservative for this place. She knew that. She had known it from the moment she stepped inside the Capitol. But she had also come prepared. The chairperson gave a nod. Her name was called. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat gently, and began speaking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today not as a politician, but as a citizen. One who believes that truth should never need a filter. She began explaining how government messages were often changed before reaching the public, facts twisted. Stories timed to benefit one side. She talked about patterns of information control. She wasn't blaming one party. She was pointing to something deeper. The way power sometimes chooses what people are allowed to know. And that's when it happened. Adam Schiff leaned forward. In his chair. He had been watching her with a calm, almost bored look. Then, with a small smile and a voice dripping with sarcasm, he interrupted. Well, it's adorable, he said. That we're getting a civics lesson from someone who probably still gets carded at the airport. A few people laughed. Others smiled quietly. Schiff leaned back, satisfied. The moment was cruel, but quick, just enough to sting. Just enough to remind everyone who still owned the room. Karoline paused. Her face didn't change much. Just a blink, a breath. She looked at Schiff the way someone looks at an old map, carefully, but with quiet understanding. Then she smiled softly, and then she said it, Congressman Schiff. She began, her voice calm and steady. I may be young, but at least I remember what truth sounds like. The room froze. The laughter died so fast it left a chill. No one moved. Even the committee clerk looked up from her notes. Schiff didn't speak. He didn't blink, just stared, trying to measure the moment he had just lost. Karoline didn't stop. Scareline didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. Scareline, she simply began. She spoke of leaked documents, of emails between public officials and media editors that hinted at early access and message coordination. She quoted from intelligence reports that had never been shown to the public. She named dates, times, subjects. Every word was clean, sharp, and full of control. The American people, she said, are not confused because they don't understand the news. They're confused because they are being managed like a focus group. What they're told and when they're told it is often not based on urgency, but on strategy. Some members of the committee began taking notes. A few leaned in. She read from one email chain, a conversation between a media advisor and a federal agency contact. It showed how a story about a foreign cyber threat was delayed until after an election because of timing sensitivity. Karoline didn't accuse Schiff directly. She didn't need to. The facts were arrows, and she aimed them at the system. In one case, she continued, a government talking point was sent to 3 major outlets before the official press conference had even happened. Here there were murmurs in the back of the room. Reporters were already texting their editors. One of them whispered, "Are these emails confirmed?" Karoline heard the whisper. She answered without turning. "Oh, will be. I've submitted them to this committee, and a redacted version will be made public after today's hearing." Schiff shifted slightly in his seat. His face was unreadable. He wasn't smiling now. His fingers tapped slowly on the edge of his folder, the rhythm uncertain. She quoted a whistleblower from within a federal agency, a former analyst who described how news events were sometimes classified and delayed not for security but for political impact. By the time she finished, the room felt different. Not because everyone agreed with her, but because they couldn't ignore her. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged for attention. She had stood still, spoken clearly, and thrown open a door that no one expected her to have the key for. The chairman thanked her. The gavel tapped once. The hearing moved on, but the cameras didn't. News alerts began flashing, breaking. Leavitt's line freezes. Hearing room young Republican drops intel shocker on live TV. Did she just outfox Schiff? As Karoline stepped away from the microphone, she didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at Schiff either. She looked straight ahead. And somewhere in the silence of a paused Washington, a storm had just begun. The hearing was over. But the country was only just beginning to react. Karoline Leavitt's clip had already been viewed over 5 million times online. Her words, "I may be young, but at least I remember what truth sounds like," were now printed on coffee mugs, T-shirts, and Twitter banners. The moment had taken on a life of its own. But behind the scenes, Karoline didn't feel like a hero. She sat in a small windowless office 2 floors below the Capitol, her phone buzzing nonstop. Her aide, Julian, had turned off 3 of their devices. Already, reporters were calling, allies were cheering, critics were sharpening knives. Her social media had exploded with both praise and threats. Julian looked up from his laptop. "Your emails just got dumped by some blogger in Maine? The ones you read from at the hearing? They're real, and now everyone knows it." Karoline rubbed her forehead. "Good. That means they'll have to respond." But she was nervous. Because what the public didn't know was that those emails, and a lot more, hadn't come from a legal request or committee subpoena. They had come from a man named Madsen. She had met him 3 weeks before at a coffee shop in Arlington, middle-aged, quiet, no phone. No real name, just Madsen. He said he used to work in the media coordination office inside the Department of Homeland Security. He claimed he couldn't live with what he'd seen anymore. And then he showed her proof. Emails, voice memos, internal agency reports with red stamps and coded warnings. Karoline hadn't trusted him at first. It felt like a trap. But she ran the files past a friend from her journalism school days, who now worked as a researcher in an independent watchdog group. The files were real. Even the metadata checked out. Now she was carrying a truth so large it didn't fit neatly into politics. That night, as Julian left the office, Karoline stayed behind. She pulled out a USB drive from the bottom of her handbag, small, black, unmarked. Contained the full archive Madsen had given her, minus the few emails she had already used. She plugged it into her laptop and opened a folder marked Redact, Strategy 2022-23. Inside were dozens of documents, timelines, media briefing outlines, and communication logs between federal agencies and senior producers at major news networks. Not just one party, both. Messages about when to highlight certain arrests, when to downplay economic figures, even when to seed doubt through unnamed sources. It wasn't illegal, but it was ugly and dangerous. Suddenly, her phone rang, unknown number. She paused, then picked up. "Hello?" A man's voice, flat and controlled, answered. "You need to be careful, Ms. Leavitt." She froze. "Who is this?" "You're entering a space where careers, reputations, and even nations are at risk. Just understand that. This isn't just about Adam Schiff or you. It's bigger." The line went dead. She stared at the screen, then slowly set the phone. Down outside her window, the city buzzed with cars and lights. But inside, her office felt like a vault, sealed and cold. The next morning, she received an encrypted email from a burner account. Subject: "If you keep going, they'll try to discredit you." Attached 2007 internal memo project, Prism Lens Confidential. She opened it. It was a strategy paper. A breakdown of how misinformation could be fought not just by removing content, but by discrediting the sources. It described social media campaigns, quiet media partnerships, and private surveillance teams. She felt sick. If this was real and everything so far had been, then the game she was playing wasn't political anymore. It was strategic warfare, not with guns, but with truth. She met Julian an hour later in a private co-working space in Northwest D.C. "You're not sleeping," he said. "I can't," she replied. "What we have, it could burn down more than careers. I mean, maybe stop." She looked at him. "You think I should?" Julian didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "I think you already know you won't." That evening, she received a call from a major news network. They wanted her on their primetime segment the next night. Live, national audience, full access. "Will you bring more documents?" a producer asked. Karoline hesitated.
Maybe.
"But not all of it." She hung up, then opened the last file on the USB, a list of agency insiders. Some had spoken off the record, some were unnamed. And one had a tag next to his name, Schiff Intermediary. She stared at it, heart racing. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The video clip had crossed 10 million views by morning. KarolineLeavitts.com, but Brutal Line had become more than just a viral moment. It was now a national debate. Morning news shows played the footage on loop. Conservative hosts called her the new face of truth. Liberal commentators accused her of manipulating classified documents. But both sides agreed on one thing: she had hit a nerve. At her apartment, Karoline sat on the floor with a half-eaten sandwich and a muted television blaring her own face. She barely looked at it. She was focused on something else. A set of printed transcripts from the USB drive Madsen had given her. Each document raised new questions. One showed an internal chat between a media strategist and a Department of Defense liaison. The chat suggested a plan to delay coverage of a failed overseas mission until after a midterm election. The public version of the event was packaged carefully. Words like controlled setback and minimal exposure had been approved before any press was informed. Julian, her aide, was now handling press requests and fending off ones that were turning more aggressive. "They're digging," he said, pacing the small living room. "Not just the reporters. I got a call from someone at the House Ethics Committee. Someone's trying to start an investigation." "On me?" Karoline asked. He nodded. "They're calling it a document origin review. They want to know how you got the emails." Karoline stood, walked to the window, and looked outside. The Capitol dome glowed in the distance. "They can investigate all they want. We haven't leaked anything illegal. We showed patterns. We showed the truth." Julian said nothing. They knew that wasn't how Washington worked. That afternoon, Schiff broke his silence. Standing before a wall of reporters flanked by staffers, he gave a short but firm statement. "While I fully support the right of any elected official to raise concerns," he said, "I also believe we must protect the integrity of classified material. Ms. Leavitt's dramatic performance may have pleased some online audiences. But we must ask ourselves, at what cost?" He didn't deny that documents were real. He didn't confirm them either. Karoline watched the press conference live. Her eyes narrowed. Then came the unexpected shift. A new leak. This time, it didn't come from her. Small, independent newsblog based in Europe published a redacted version of the same documents. Karoline had shown in the hearing, along with new files she hadn't released yet. Files she hadn't even opened. The blog claimed it had received the documents anonymously. It even included a message: "Public trust is not a partisan issue. This belongs to everyone." Julian burst into her office. "You see this? Someone else has the files." Karoline was already typing. "No, someone wants it to look that way. They're trying to discredit me, make it look like I lost control of the data." Julian's phone buzzed. He looked down. "CNN, they want you for a panel debate tonight. And so does Al Jazeera. They want a one-on-one, live, no preconditions." Karoline didn't hesitate. "Book both. CNN tonight, Al Jazeera tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" She nodded. "We don't wait. We lead." That evening, she walked into CNN headquarters for the segment. The panel was all ready. Hot two Democratic commentators. one retired intelligence officer, and a tech policy expert. The moderator wasted no time. Karoline, you're being called brave, reckless, disruptive, even dangerous. Do you think you crossed a line? Karoline sat forward. I think the line was already crossed. I just held up a mirror. The retired intelligence officer frowned. These kinds of disclosures, even if not illegal, weaken public trust in government agencies. Karoline looked straight at him. If public trust is broken by the truth, maybe it's the system that's weak, not the people. The panel buzzed. The debate grew sharper. Then Karoline dropped something new. She revealed that she had submitted a sealed memo to the House Oversight Committee. A list of communications between senior officials and media outlets ahead of several high-profile government announcements. The names were still redacted. For now, the room went still for a moment. What are you suggesting? Asked the moderator. I'm suggesting, Karoline said slowly, that we've accepted the idea that managing the truth is the same as protecting the country. I disagree. The show ended with Karoline trending again, this time globally. By morning, European and Middle Eastern newspapers carried headlines. Young American lawmaker challenges media government nexus truth. Youth, and Washington's new power player. She may be 26, but Washington is listening, but something darker was also brewing. At 2:13 a.m., Julian received a text from a restricted number. If she continues, she won't just lose her seat. She'll lose everything. He didn't tell her, not yet. Instead, he forwarded the message to someone she hadn't spoken to in months, someone who used to work in federal cybersecurity. Karoline had opened the door. Now someone else was deciding what or who to send through. The morning was unusually quiet. Karoline sat in the back seat of a black sedan, windows tinted, engine humming low. The car moved steadily through a side street in Arlington, Virginia, far from Capitol Hill, far from TV studios, and far from the noise. She was on her way to meet someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who had emailed her 2 nights ago using an encrypted burner account. The message had been simple. You're only scratching the surface. Meet me. No phones. Okay. No aides. She had almost said no, but something about the tone, direct, urgent, personal, made her listen. The driver pulled up to a bookstore that had been closed for years. The windows were dusty and the awning was torn. But the side entrance, as instructed, was unlocked. Inside, the smell of old paper filled the air. A single desk lamp lit the corner. A man stepped forward, tall, late 50s, gray blazer. Nervous eyes. Call me Whitaker, he said. Karoline didn't offer a handshake. You said you had proof. He nodded and handed her a folder. No USB, no emails, just paper. She opened it. Inside were copies of internal memos from a department known as the Office of Strategic Media, a lesser-known branch operating within Homeland Security. It wasn't illegal, but it was highly classified. The memos described something shocking. A multi-agency initiative called Project Halo, a program designed not to inform the public, but to shape perception around national events. Karoline looked up. Is this real? Whitaker nodded. Started under one administration, expanded under the next. Doesn't matter who's in power, they all use it. The documents showed that headlines, narratives, even social media trends were sometimes influenced by pre-written briefings sent to select media partners. In some cases, agency officials suggested which expert commentators should appear on certain shows. They even coordinated online sentiment shaping, buying trends, hashtags, comment patterns. Karoline flipped to the last page. Her own name was there, tagged under a memo titled Unpredictable Voices, Phase 3 Risk Profiles. Her face, her quote from the hearing. And a note, monitor closely, potential for disruption. She stared at the page for a long time. They've been watching me since before the hearing. Whitaker leaned forward. They watch all of you. Anyone who doesn't follow the script? Karoline closed the folder. Why are you giving this to me? She asked. He sighed. Because I used to believe in this program. I thought it kept us safe. Now, I think it's just keeping us quiet. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rain tapped lightly on the windows. Karoline stood up, folder in hand. I need originals, not just copies. Whitaker nodded. I'll get you what I can, but be careful. You've already pushed further than most. Back at her apartment, Julian was waiting, pacing. You missed your Al Jazeera interview, he said, exasperated. I had something more important. He looked at the folder in her hand. Julian listened as she explained everything. As he turned the pages, his face changed. They're building a machine, he said slowly. One that doesn't care who's in office. That night they scanned and encrypted every page. They saved the files to multiple drives. Then they sent copies to 3 trusted journalists, people known for publishing difficult truths. The storm would break soon. But they needed to move. Faster. The next morning, Karoline returned to the Capitol for a closed-door intelligence briefing. She wasn't invited, but she showed up anyway, with the folder in her hand. When a staffer stopped her, she raised her voice calmly, but firmly. I have information directly tied to the integrity of this committee and the safety of the public trust. You will let me speak. After a pause, they let her in. Inside the chamber, several lawmakers turned in surprise. Schiff was there. Met her eyes, then quickly looked away. Karoline walked to the chairman's desk and laid the folder down. Project Halo, she said. Do you know about it? The room grew still. One of the ranking members, a Democrat from New York, spoke. Softly, where did you get this? Karoline didn't blink. From someone who still believes the American people deserve the truth. A silence followed. Then whispers, then worry. She turned to leave, but not before catching Schiff watching her again. His look was different now. Not contempt, not amusement, fear. By that afternoon, the first journalist she'd sent the documents to had published the first part of the story. Headline: Shadow Program Inside DHS Controls Media Messaging Whistleblower. Confirms cable news networks scrambled to respond. Some downplayed the story. Others tried to shift focus back to Karoline's credentials. But it was too late. Fire had started. And somewhere in a room no one could see, powerful people were now asking one urgent question. How do you silence a voice the world is already listening? The sun hadn't even risen over Washington when the backlash began. Karoline's name was everywhere, trending in the U.S., Europe, even parts of the Middle East. Not because of her age, not because of her politics, but because she had just exposed something bigger than anyone had expected. Project Halo, the federal program quietly shaping what America sees, hears, and believes. By mid-morning, news anchors were scrambling for updates. Intelligence officials were refusing to comment, and inside the White House, high-level meetings were being held behind locked doors. And on Capitol Hill, Adam Schiff struck back. At 9:32 a.m., he held a press conference in front of the Intelligence Committee seal. Cameras packed tightly in the room. Reporters leaned in, already expecting fire. I want to be very clear, Schiff began, his voice calm but sharp. Ms. Leavitt's public release of what she claims to be sensitive material, potentially classified, is not just reckless, it's dangerous. We are dealing with matters that impact national security, global diplomacy, and public stability. He didn't deny Project Halo existed. He didn't confirm it either. But he called for an immediate House Ethics Committee investigation into Karoline's actions, citing unauthorized possession of government materials and potential misuse of whistleblower testimony. The message was clear: if she wouldn't back down, they would come for her legitimacy and her seat. Karoline watched the press conference from a staff lounge inside a local TV studio. She had just finished taping a morning interview with a foreign news channel when Julian rushed in. They've opened the inquiry, he said, holding up his phone. You're officially under investigation. Karoline didn't flinch. Of course I am. Julian hesitated. They're going to make it personal now. Your school records, your campaign donors, your family. I know he handed her another phone. You're up next. Live prime time. CNN tonight? She exhaled, stood and walked to the green room. She could already hear the host warming up the audience. 30 minutes later, Karoline sat beneath the bright studio lights, facing three people who didn't want her there: a political analyst, a former NSA spokesperson, and a veteran anchor who had interviewed every president since Clinton. The first question came fast. Ms. Leavitt, are you prepared to face criminal consequences for exposing national security programs? Karoline leaned forward. When the public is being lied to, every delay is dangerous. I didn't expose troop movements or intelligence assets. I exposed manipulation. That's not espionage. That's integrity. The NSA spokesperson cut in. But perception management isn't new. Governments have always shaped messaging. The question is, were you manipulated yourself by someone with a personal agenda? Karoline looked directly into the camera. Someone gave me these documents to bring down a political enemy. They failed because I didn't attack a party. I exposed a system. The room was silent for a moment. Then the host leaned in. Do you have more documents? She didn't blink. Yes. Julian, watching from the control room, closed his eyes for a second. She had just escalated everything. And she wasn't done. In fact, she continued. Tomorrow, I'll release selected parts of a second internal memo. This one detailing how social media platforms were contacted by government contractors to redirect trending discussions during two specific events: the pandemic lockdowns and the foreign election interference reports. The host looked stunned. You're saying the government manipulated online conversations? I'm saying they didn't just manage information, they curated belief. The segment ended with chaos, commentators shouting over each, other anchors asking for proof. Commercial breaks triggered too early, but the damage or the truth was already out. That night, Karoline's apartment felt more like a war room. Papers everywhere, screens lit, a burner phone buzzing every few minutes. Julian opened a fresh file sent anonymously from a secure contact. Looks like they're trying to tie you to a foreign journalist. Say you leaked data overseas. Karoline raised an eyebrow. I'll let them try. I sent documents to 3 U.S. reporters, all verified. Someone else leaked more? It wasn't me. But deep down, she knew something was shifting. The story was out of her hands now. The next morning, an emergency statement came from the White House press secretary. The administration does not engage in media manipulation. We support journalistic freedom and will allow the appropriate committees to review all claims. No further comment at this time. It was a non-denial denial, and it told Karoline everything she needed to know. They were rattled. But with the ethics inquiry underway and whispers of federal charges floating through Washington, she had a choice to make: run or go further. Later that night, her phone buzzed. An international number. Was a reporter from Deutsche. Well, in Berlin, we've uncovered references to Project Halo in leaked EU briefings, the voice said. And there's one document that names you not as a target, but as a variable in a U.S. psychological containment scenario. Karoline sat down slowly. She whispered, "They plan for me." Yes, it seems they plan for everyone. She hung up, placed the phone down, and stared at the wall. This wasn't just about Washington anymore. The world was no longer watching, it was reacting. Within 48 hours of Karoline Leavitt's CNN interview, international headlines erupted. What began as a fiery exchange in a congressional hearing had now turned into a global diplomatic tremor. Embassies requested briefings, world leaders asked questions, and foreign journalists dug deeper into a program they suspected had always existed but never had a name. Project Halo was no longer a whisper. At the United Nations in New York, a delegate from Norway raised the issue during a General Assembly debate on global press freedom. If the United States, the supposed guardian of democracy, runs perception management programs without public consent, then what separates them from the regimes they condemn? The U.S. ambassador deflected, calling it an internal matter, currently under ethical review. But the damage was already done. Inside Washington, the mood shifted from political to strategic. Karoline wasn't just a controversial figure now. She was a diplomatic liability. A rising senator from Illinois called her actions reckless. A former intelligence chief told a Sunday talk show that she should be placed under federal protection or federal control. Even within Karoline's own party, the cracks were showing. Some Republicans called her brave. Others called her a distraction. A few said nothing at all. At her makeshift war room, once her apartment, Karoline stared at a corkboard covered in notes, printouts, maps, and faces. Julian entered with a copy of a classified press release that had just leaked online. He tossed it on the table. The president's going to address the nation in 48 hours. He's going to announce a bipartisan commission to investigate federal communication strategies and reassure the public that transparency remains a core American value. Karoline picked it up. They're trying to calm the fire without naming the flame. Julian nodded, but it gets better. He turned on the TV. A live feed from Capitol Hill showed Schiff leaving a closed-door hearing. No statement, no comment. Reporters swarmed him. Word had already broken. He had been subpoenaed. Karoline watched silently. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk, because she knew what was coming next. That night, her doorbell rang. She checked the hallway camera. A man in a gray coat, face calm, hands in his pockets. She answered the door slowly. "I'm with the Office of Special Counsel," he said. "May I come in?" Karoline let him in. He showed her a small envelope. Inside was a sealed document. "You are being called to testify in a closed federal court regarding unauthorized disclosure of protected information and endangerment of national security assets." Karoline's stomach sank. Not with fear, but with understanding. They were going to try and close the curtain. "You're trying to paint this as a leak," she said. "But the public already knows." The agent didn't respond. He handed her a second document. This one not sealed. It was a protective order. "We're also placing you under temporary security protocol. You'll be moved to a secure location for the next 72 hours. There are threats." Karoline laughed bitterly. "So now I'm the one who needs protection." "Not from protesters," the man said. "It's from people who don't want this story to finish." Later that night, she and Julian were driven in an unmarked van to a government safe house outside Baltimore. 2 guards stood watch at all times. Her phone was disabled, internet access limited, her communication monitored. Julian sat across from her at a steel table. "They're building a case," he said, "trying to frame this as national disruption. You're the headline, but they're terrified of what else might come out." Karoline looked out the small window. They should be, because what no one else knew, not Schiff, not the press, not even Julian, was that there was one more document, one she hadn't shared. It was the final briefing from Project Halo, dated just 6 weeks ago. It referenced Karoline by name. Should Leavitt continue her opposition? Escalate Phase 4. Public discredit campaign. Employ surrogate influencers. Trigger distraction cycles. Fund successful. Consider controlled containment via legal intervention. She hadn't released it because she needed timing, not shock value strategy. She dropped it now. It could trigger chaos. She waited too long. The government might bury her before she could speak. The next morning, while the nation debated her fate, Karoline wrote a statement, one that would be read aloud during her closed court testimony. It began, "I did not come to destroy trust. Kay came to uncover the truth that has already been broken, carefully, silently, and with permission." Meanwhile, outside Washington, people were beginning to march. Protesters gathered outside major news studios. Journalists who once ignored Karoline were now calling for investigations into their own editorial boards, and on the other side of the world, in a quiet diplomatic chamber. A foreign intelligence official reviewed an internal alert. Containment unsuccessful. U.S. domestic. Narrative control has collapsed. Expect global consequences. The world was watching. But Karoline wasn't done. Not. The courtroom was silent. No cameras, no reporters. No social media posts. Just 12 people, a federal judge, a stenographer, and Karoline Leavitt seated alone at a long oak table. She wore no makeup. Her blazer was wrinkled. Her voice was calm. This wasn't theater. This wasn't a panel or a press interview. This was judgment. She had been summoned under national security protocol to testify behind closed doors. Not as a criminal, not officially, but as a witness accused of reckless disclosure with potential international consequence. The prosecutor, sharp-suited and colder than the room itself, stood up and began. Ms. Leavitt, can you confirm that you received and distributed documents marked confidential by at least 2 U.S. federal agencies? Karoline didn't flinch. I can confirm I shared evidence of systemic deception involving taxpayer-funded information control. Evidence the public had the right to see. The judge didn't interrupt, but she made a note. The next question was harsher. Are you aware that your disclosures have triggered diplomatic tension with 4 allied nations, resulted in suspended intelligence sharing with 2, and caused public demonstrations in 5 major cities? Karoline paused. I am aware that the truth has consequences. But so does silence. The prosecutor sighed and sat down. The room shifted to defense. But Karoline didn't have a legal team. She had a statement and a final weapon. Stood, hand steady, and pulled a small folder from her briefcase. It was sealed in evidence tape, but marked with the words, Halo Briefing for B Containment Measures. I asked the court to read this document aloud, she said, because it contains a plan. Not for war, not for law, but for me. And others like me. The judge opened the folder and began to read. The room changed with every word. The memo described targeted psychological campaigns, legal framing procedures, and, chillingly, optional media character assassination via controlled leaks. It didn't just mention Karoline, it predicted her every move. It's a line that shook the hearing. The viral interview, the public shift. It was all listed weeks in advance. Planned, everything they feared. Karoline said quietly, they prepared for. They never questioned if it was wrong. They only planned how to erase it. The judge asked no further questions. She was escorted out of the courtroom and driven back to the safe house. She hadn't won, not yet, but something had shifted. Next morning, the world caught up. A whistleblower, one of Karoline's silent allies, published the full Project Halo archive with an international media coalition. Thousands of pages. Confirmed, verified, names redacted, but actions detailed. It was all there. Selective story coordination. Media influencer briefings. Online opinion manipulation disguised as trend research. Emails from high-level government offices and networks the public trusted most. The fallout was immediate. Congressional hearings exploded into chaos. The president called for a full audit of communication strategy programs. 3 agency heads resigned within 48 hours. A bipartisan task force was formed to reestablish media integrity safeguards. And as Washington unraveled, Karoline refused all interviews. She disappeared from the news cycle. No statements. No social media. No leaks. For a week, no one knew where she was. Then, quietly, she returned to the Capitol, not to speak. Not to testify, but to resign. She submitted a short letter to the House Clerk's office. I did not come here to build a brand. I did not come here to win. Came here to remind you that truth is not a party tool and it never should have been. And if speaking it makes me a threat, then this place is in more danger than anyone wants to admit. No press conference. No farewell. She walked out, past the same steps she had walked in months before when she was just too young to be taken seriously. Now, she was too dangerous to ignore. Julian met her at the curb. "Are you ready?" "For what?" she asked. He smiled. For whatever comes next, they drove off. No destination, no protection detail, just the road. Back in Washington, a breaking news alert lit up phones. New transparency, Bill gains momentum, Leavitt legacy. In London, a protester held up a sign. "I may be young, but I remember what truth sounds like." And deep inside an intelligence agency conference room, a quiet voice said, "We made a mistake. We underestimated the one thing we couldn't: control." Another voice asked, "What's that?" The answer came like a whisper: "Belief?" The screen went black. But the story, the truth, had just